Now I'd like to move on to the presentation for our chairman, Dr. Borer, and his wife, Brondi. I met Dr. Borer about 3 years ago in his office, and I asked him to be a chairman of our committee. But I have to make a confession. I was terrified. You can't believe how scared I was. I wasn't scared of making the asking him to donate. That wasn't my problem. My problem wasn't meeting one of the most world-famous and foremost doctors. I was scared he was going to ask me, Dr. Boyer would ask me, what is the Brooklyn Jewish Center Circle? Because at that time, I had absolutely no idea what we were going to do. But thank God, Dr. Boyer said, yes, I am here and I will help. If it's connected with the center, I will do what I can. And tonight, Dr. Boyer, you could ask me. And I have a lot what to tell you. At this time, I would like to ask Dr. Jeffrey Boyer to come to the podium together with his wife, Brondi, for a presentation. And I would like to ask a dear friend, Betsy McCoy, to say a few words. Coming this way. And while they're coming to the podium, when it came to Dr. Boyer's presentation, we were trying to think of what to say and what we could present him with. And we decided, when I went to visit Dr. Boyer's office, I noticed he had beautiful pictures on his wall, and we decided to present him a picture that is very unique for our institution, for our community. Two ladies, two men, Dr. Boyer.
I'll stand over here with you.
Okay, we're good. Tonight, with Betsy McCoy with us, we'd like to present this beautiful picture.
Oh God, another one.
It's a picture
How beautiful.
of the Lubavitcher Rebbe walking into his library, and in the background is the beautiful building that we're in tonight of Brooklyn Jewish Center.
It's really beautiful.
And for Mrs. Borer, I would like to ask Betsy to present a beautiful bouquet of orchids.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now Betsy's
Oh,
going to
one moment, a picture.
Yes. Betsy's going to talk
I'll have
first.
it.
Okay.
Betsy would like to say a few words as a dear friend, and then we'll hear from Dr. Borer.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be with you tonight to celebrate 90 years of the Brooklyn Jewish Center, the glory days of the past and the glory days to come. And doesn't it look beautiful tonight? Really wonderful. Dr. Jeffrey Borer and Brondi Borer represent what you just heard a moment ago. Some people have goodness but not greatness. Some people have greatness but not goodness. But these two people have both intellect, compassion, and a willingness to always give. If you need someone to donate to a charity or help your sick friend, call Brondi and Jeffrey Borer. And their roots are right here in Brooklyn. Brondi is a civil rights activist, and her parents met at the New Utrecht Evening High School many years ago. They were married at a temple right here in the neighborhood. Brondi's a graduate of Cardozo Law School, part of Yeshiva University. And recently, earlier this year, she was awarded the very prestigious Nathaniel Gates Award. I was there. The room was filled with very prominent lawyers and civil rights activists. Jeffrey Borer's roots also are right here in Brooklyn. He grew up on Principal Street, President Street. He went to PS 167, Whitby High School, and then on to Harvard, Cornell Medical School, and a very distinguished career. No, let me say, not a career, a calling as a research scientist and a physician. My sweetheart, Chuck Bruni, who's sitting right here in the front row, is a monument to Dr. Jeffrey Borer's success. Chuck had endocarditis, and on a Sunday night, he was near death, but Dr. Jeffrey Borer oversaw his care as he was given a new heart valve and many years of life. Right. Now, Jeffrey Borer is our doctor. We almost always do what he says, but not tonight, because Jeffrey told us not to regale you with all his accomplishments. The fact is, Dr. Jeffrey Borer has written over 400 peer-reviewed articles. Most doctors aspire to write one. He's written 4 books, and I cannot count the lives he's saved or the families who are deeply indebted to him. He believes in medical excellence. For example, now that he's chief of medicine at Downstate, he's making preventing hospital infections one of the goals. And he's worked very closely with my committee to reduce infection deaths. So I want to tell you, if you have to go to the hospital, go to Downstate. They're really paying attention to the risk of hospital infections and making sure it doesn't happen to you. That's right. He's also applying his management skills at Downstate to ensure that it has a firmer fiscal footing in the future so that that wonderful institution will be there when your family needs medical care. Now, I've told you a little bit about his managerial accomplishments, his great clinical accomplishments, but he insisted that I tell you about his Epicurean accomplishments. When he went to Downstate as chief of medicine, he noticed that most of the meetings were at 7 a.m., and they were serving something unrecognizable. It was round, it was bread-like, and it had a hole in the middle. But it was inedible, and it certainly did not bear the name bagel or live up to the name bagel. So he sought a higher authority, Rabbi Bloomis, who told him to go to Bunch of Bagels on Troy Avenue and get the real thing. Right. So he brought in his bag of bagels for the next meeting. He put them on one platter. The hospital food service put their bagels on the other platter. You can guess which platter was empty at the end of the meeting. Now, Jeffrey, in his own self-effacing way, insisted that this is his major accomplishment at Downstate. But I want to tell you, the great researchers in this world who revere Jeffrey Borer, the families who feel so indebted to him, and the young doctors who are training under him will tell you that there's a lot to celebrate and a lot to be thankful for in Jeffrey Borer. So let me again applaud Dr. Jeffrey Borer and his wonderful wife, Brondi Borer.
Betsy, thank you very much for those exaggerated comments. I appreciate them. And thank you, Rabbi Bloomis and the entire Chabad Lubavitch community for saving, preserving, and using this building and creating this reunion. You know, it's hard to stand in front of a group of people and talk when you can't eat dinner because I'm talking. But I'm going to do that anyway. Because someone needs to tell the story of what happened here 90 years ago, of why this building was built in this way, in this place, at that time. This story isn't going to be found in the contemporary newspaper articles or photographs or anything else in the archives. And not one of the founders of the Brooklyn Jewish Center is still alive. Many of their children are dead too, which leaves mainly the grandchildren and some great-grandchildren to reconstruct the story from what we heard and from the characteristics of the people we knew. Of course, by the time we were around, we took the center for granted. To us, it had always been here, and we thought it always would be. Also, if the founders were still here, they wouldn't tell the story the way I will. First, they were too close to the events to have the needed perspective, and if they did realize what had happened, the memory probably was too painful to be acknowledged. The story of the center is an important element in the story of Jewish emigration from Europe to America. As you may know, the story begins in 1654. 23 Spanish and Portuguese Jews are expelled from Recife on pain of deportation or death. That Dutch colony of Brazil has just been recaptured by the Portuguese, and the Portuguese Inquisition is still ongoing. The Spanish and Portuguese Jews sail north to New Amsterdam, owned by the Dutch West India Company. Fortunately, there are Jews on the board of governors of the company in the Netherlands. They insist on granting asylum. The Jews stay and eventually build the first synagogue and Hebrew school in Lower Manhattan. Over the next 2 centuries, there's another migration, this time primarily from Germany. The ghettos still exist, poverty among the Jewish community is common, and intense religious bigotry is still rampant. To avoid these problems, first small groups, and by the mid-19th century, large groups leave Germany. In fact, in the mid-19th century, besides economic restrictions and religious bigotry, bloody revolutions are sweeping across Central Europe and destabilizing the order of society. You know, when a revolution occurs, unless you support it passionately, the best place to be while it's going on is someplace else. Of course, some Jews do support the revolutions, but this comes with a price. Jews are offered entry into the mainstream of the new society, but only if they pledge primary allegiance to the new order and renounce allegiance to what is called the Jewish nation. One solution to this dilemma was the foundation of Reform Judaism and the beginnings of conservative Judaism right at that time. By the late 19th century, revolution migrates eastward to the Russian Empire. The ruler there is far more authoritarian than further west. The Jews already have been forced to relocate to a well-demarcated region known as the Pale of Settlement. Then, as the Tsarist regime totters under revolutionary pressures, authorities follow the usual pattern of authoritarian rulers. They unleash uprisings against convenient scapegoats to divert attention from the central problems. From 1903 to 1906, the scapegoats were immediately at hand, the Jews in the Pale of Settlement. Mobs aided by secret police massacred Jewish communities in a series of pogroms. So now, in addition to religious bigotry and economic hardship, we have the threat of imminent death. As the pogroms continue, many thousands of Jews leave Eastern Europe and come to New York. Most are impoverished. Gradually, many of the more ambitious gravitate to Crown Heights, where the streets are lined with trees, they can buy a house, there are nice schools and parks for the children, and where they can prosper. And prosper they do. In fact, within 15 years, Crown Heights becomes one of the most prosperous Jewish communities in America. As a community matures, you know, it needs a way to legitimize itself. For Jews, establishing legitimacy involves building a synagogue. But by 1919, there are already synagogues in the neighborhood, so why build another? The reason is that the Jews of Crown Heights need more than legitimacy. Remember, they have been forced to flee for their lives. Psychologically, that creates a sense of impotence that is virtually impossible ever to overcome. So for these Jews, the building of a synagogue is not just for practicing religion and legitimizing the community, but more importantly, a way to declare their legacy. They are financially established, their children will go to college, they can walk the streets freely, and now they need to say to the oppressors who threw them out, look at what I did. This is my creation, my legacy. What did you do during the past 15 years, except to descend into war, greater poverty, greater ignorance, and greater insecurity. So for these Jews, it's necessary not just to build a synagogue, but to build the biggest and the best. And they do. By 1922, when the doors open, there is no synagogue in the world as magnificent as this one. And most magnificent of all is the main sanctuary. It's gone today. It was dismantled in 2002, and its parts used to help build newer and smaller synagogues. But for any who remember, and who have traveled elsewhere as I have, you know that this was the most magnificent. This was the best. But the sanctuary isn't enough. Just as for the early Spanish and Portuguese immigrants, it's necessary to include a school so that the history, the ethical precepts, and the culture of our people will be transmitted to future generations. And they don't just establish a Hebrew school, which I attend on Sunday morning and Tuesdays and Thursday afternoons until I'm 13. They also establish a secular primary school chartered by the state of New York as the Center Academy to teach Jewish children not only what it means to be Jewish, but to teach reading and writing and arithmetic in English so that these children can be good and productive Americans. And that's not enough either. They establish a community center for the congregation and its guests. There is this very ballroom where we're sitting tonight. There's the big dining room on the mezzanine. There are the two kitchens, Milchedick and Fleischedick, the gymnasium, the swimming pool, and all the other facilities. The earliest memory I have is coming to the center with my family for Thanksgiving dinner when I'm 2.5 years old. I don't think, though, that this is built merely to provide recreation. I think it's more than that. One member of this restoration committee is Barry Tucker, who's here to honor his father, Richard Tucker, who I was privileged to hear sing and who, in my view, was the greatest Italianate tenor who ever lived. Richard Tucker's parents had come from Bessarabia, where the bloodiest pogrom took place. He serves as cantor here, is the cantor at my parents' wedding, and then leaves for the Metropolitan Opera, the greatest opera house in the world, where he sings for 30 years. In the early 20th century, long before Tucker, the chairman of the Metropolitan Opera Board is Otto Kahn, a fabulously successful investment banker and a German Jew. He builds a magnificent 80-room palace on 5th Avenue and 91st Street, a beautiful estate on Long Island. However, by the time, after he's already the chairman of the board, by the time he is allowed to buy a box at the Met, Otto Kahn nominally converts from Judaism and assimilates. For the founders of this synagogue, like most Eastern European Jews, assimilation and even nominal renunciation of their religion is unthinkable. So if they can't control the Met, they need a parallel replacement, and that's what they aim to create here. In its heyday, the center offers lectures, concerts, cultural programs. They were of sufficient quality so that the Jews of Crown Heights can believe they don't need the Met. Remember, they need to say, this is my legacy. Now, one final part of the story. The founders of this synagogue are Orthodox Jewish men, but they realize they can't have prospered in Crown Heights without the partnership of their wives. Several of them think, therefore, that in the synagogue they need to share with their wives what they've created. So a section of the main floor of the main sanctuary is established as a place where men and women can sit together. In 1919 and 1922, this was and still is a revolutionary idea within the Orthodox community, but it's done. The Brooklyn Jewish Center, therefore, is established as a conservative congregation. It's really an extraordinary story what happened here 90 years ago, and no one involved is around to tell it. Now I've told you, and I hope you don't mind my taking your time. More importantly, I hope you remember and tell it to your children. Thank you.